The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
All right. That's right. So I'm going to hand it over to Andrew. And this is basically, we're continuing our track on narrative and writing for games. On Wednesday, we're switching back over to production, and we'll be talking with, we'll have folks from Blizzard to talk with us. But for today, more narrative.
All right, we're going to talk about writing for computer games, or games in general. I'm here with Heather Albano and Laura Baldwin, who have very different experiences with writing. And so I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in, and we'll just sort of see what happens on this and have a conversation. And in a bit, we're going to start opening up to questions from you folks, and we'll just sort of play it by ear and go on. So I want to start with, why don't you go ahead and answer first, Heather. What was your path towards getting into writing for games? Not for computer, just games.
I usually tell people I got into it sideways. So my freshman year in college, my first week of my freshman year in college, I looked out the dorm window and there were people with boffer swords out in the quad. And my new best friend and I looked at each other and said, I'll go check it out if you'll come with me. And so I got involved playing with a LARP and live action role playing a game. And then I got involved writing for it. And I did that as a hobby for a number of years, like through college and into the real world. And when I was in 2009, I lost my job in marketing. It was the year that everybody lost their job. And Adam Morse, whom I knew from the LARP, called me and said he was founding a games company. This is Choice of Games, which possibly you've heard of. They've done pretty well in the 4 years since. At the time, it was a lark. He said, do you want to write for us? It may never turn into anything. And I said, yeah, why not? So started me on a really amazing adventure of started writing for them, and now I do freelance for other people as well, and here I am.
All right, cool.
Mine actually is not so dissimilar. I went to college and got involved in the MIT Assassin's Guild, which hopefully some of you have heard of, which is another LARP. And started writing for them, did sit-down games. Then I went to grad school, got a degree in immunology, and decided I didn't want to be a biologist, which is much like you losing your job.
Yep, 6 months.
And I got a half-time job working at MIT because they only had half of a head count in the thing that I was doing. And my other half-time job was a friend of mine who I had written some assassin games with and done some sit-downing with, had at a point in the past founded a computer game company, or been part of creating a computer game company, Looking Glass, I think it was Studios first, and said, well, I know that you know how to write things and know how things about games and can work well with others, so do you want to come and work for us? And since I wanted to keep my job with the healthcare, I worked half-time for them and half-time for MIT, and did that for a number of years until Looking Glass ended up going bankrupt, and now I just work for MIT. And still do sit-downs and stuff. But yeah, it does seem to be about, you get into games first and then you have connections with other people and they get you into game companies.
Networking works is the moral of the story.
It really does, yeah.
Meet each other.
You never know later. Everyone you meet today might be helpful, yeah. So you've both done a fair bit of writing for games. You've done writing outside of games at all.
You want to take it first this time?
So I work in customer support now, and that involves a lot of writing email back to people. That has trained me to be concise and clear and friendly in writing. It's a little bit related, but that's about it.
Okay, in contrast, I do a lot of non-game fiction writing. My dream job for years was to be able to write novels, and it's actually less so as I've had success in writing for games, which is fulfilling in its own way and pays a lot better than writing short fiction. But I've sold some short fiction and some poetry to magazines. I've self-published 2 novels, and that's sort of on the hobby side of my life these days.
Got it. And we'll come back to that in a little bit, I think. So I want to talk about what kinds of games you worked on, and so what kind of writing that you've done has appeared in those games. And feel free to name names and whatnot of what you've worked on. Why don't you go ahead, Heather?
So my professional game writing divides into three categories pretty neatly. I've done most of it for Choice of Games, which does multiple choice text-based games of the Choose Your Path variety, so kind of like the old Choose Your Own Adventure books, if you're familiar with those, although better written if I say it myself. So that's all text, right? All text all the time. I was lead writer on Codename Cygnus 2 years ago now, which is an interactive radio drama, which is sort of the same idea in that it is all word-based, but obviously the interface is very different. And I have done some work on for paper and pencil RPGs. Time Watch by Kevin Culp is coming out next year, and I've got some work in that.
There's a small world again. Okay, I know Kevin Culp.
I figured you did. Looking Glass, right? Wasn't he?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, his wife worked for Looking Glass, and etc. So talk to me a little bit about interactive radio show. How does that work?
So you play it off your iPod, and I think now your Android. It talks to you. And at it narrates what's going on. You play a spy in a James Bond kind of world. And so it tells you the circumstance you're in and then asks you if you want to do this or that in response. And you say the word. The voice recognition is pretty good, but it's not super sophisticated. It wasn't designed to be. So you don't get to talk back to it in a natural way. You have to say the... it's a little bit better than pick A or pick B, but you have to say the words that it gives you.
Got it. So you can say shoot gun, not villain or whatever.
Exactly. Now, I draw the gun and duck behind the, no, I shoot the gun. But yeah, so other than that, it's mostly multiple choice.
All right, so the behind-the-scenes mechanics are very similar to the multiple choice text adventure,
yes.
But it's text that's going to be heard instead of read.
Exactly.
Oh, all right, neat. And Laura.
What was the original question?
The original question is what sorts of stuff what kinds of games you worked on, and how did your stuff appear in there?
So I was kind of since I was part-time, they didn't want to put me in charge of any specific levels or anything. So I did a lot of odd jobs. I ended up writing the manual for System Shock 2, which was really exciting because a lot of the time you have to write the manual before the game mechanics are sorted out. So you would say things like, this psi power provides defense. Really have no idea, sorry. And then in Thief and Thief 2, I did a lot of sort of like random books that are scattered around, or dialogue that characters would say to each other. There wasn't much that characters said to each other. And then the guards and so on, you're trying to sneak around, and the guards are basically walking around being emitters of what they think is going on right now, which, if you're really sneaky, they're like, I have no idea anything is going on. I am bored. I see nothing. I hear nothing. But if they see you briefly or hear you briefly, then they sort of have to emit their state, which is, I'm mildly suspicious because I heard something, but I don't know what it was, or I am really suspicious because I just saw a thief going that way. And but they're not very bright AIs, so they don't have a lot of different state that they can say. They have a level of suspicion and then a level of what caused the suspicion, and there's a big matrix of that. And then you don't want your guards to say, the same thing every single time, so you have to have like 20 different things for each of those categories, and it gets kind of tedious and difficult to come up with 20 different ways to say, I am mildly suspicious because of a noise, without sounding like you've been coached to say that. How many natural ways can you say that? And then, yeah. That was most, right?
Yeah, that's good. And so let's jump right into a little bit here, the difference between writing for stuff that people are going to read versus stuff people are going to hear. It sounds like you've got a lot of experience with that, with long form read words. and you're talking about guards that are saying things out loud, but also written books. And those are very different things, I assume, in terms of how the player's going to appreciate them.
Yeah. So the thing that I learned pretty quickly about stuff that is said out loud is that the players want it to be really, really short, which makes it in particular extra hard because, huh, or what was that? They want to have about that much of interaction with the guard that they're hiding from, and you have to convey all this like little settings because you want to have people know the difference between a huh that's like or a huh that's like huh, I'm gonna get you. So there's also a lot of like little stage notes, huh, angry. But I ended up writing a lot of like little short dialogues for guards to be talking to each other or it was mostly guards, that you could sneak by and hear, and sometimes it was to convey information about where something was. And sadly, kind of the first thing that we got told after the playtesting was, those are just too long. Nobody wants to sit there for 3 minutes and hide in the shadows listening to guards talk to each other about something, especially not more than once. And so really only one of the conversations that was more than 4 lines survived into the shipping game, which is at the very beginning of the first level. And you can skip it. It's the guards talking to each other in the courtyard about going to the bear pits. And you can go and you can listen to them, and it tells you a little bit about the world. Or you can just sneak around and go back to the secret entrance. And so if you're playing the game for the second time, you do not have to listen to all of it.
So does that, there's a lot of conversation left on the cutting room floor, as it were, then?
Yeah, yeah.
Because it wasn't until playtest that you realized that it was too long.
I guess it must have been recorded, and because most of our guards were being voiced by programmers, at least early on. I think we definitely kept Dan Thrawn as the stupid guard. Right. He became very popular.
He's got a very expressive voice. Yeah. So I imagine your form of fiction, Heather, is a little bit different because it's longer form to begin with, so you expect a bit more patience on the part of your players.
Yep. And also, all they've got is the words. The dialogue isn't in the radio drama, for instance. The dialogue isn't a distraction from the mechanic. The dialogue is the mechanic. It's all they got to react to.
Yeah, you don't want to. They're not going to be saying, "Oh, I want to fast forward through all this," because why would they be playing?
Right, exactly. All they're doing is listening to other voice actors, putting together a drama, and then they're responding to it, interacting with it. The difference between But there is a difference between writing dialogue that will be read and writing dialogue that will be spoken. In the choice of games, we have a lot more. We have a lot more freedom. We have a lot more. We have a lot of things that aren't the dialogue. You can put in a tag that says, "Hey, he said angrily," right? Or you can say that he said it while folding his arms, or whatever, that gives the reader a clue as to what they're dealing with. When you're writing a radio drama, all you've got is the dialogue and the stage cues for the actors. I got a lot better at writing dialogue very, very, very fast out of necessity working for that project. People who write traditional fiction will tell you that there shouldn't be a difference. You should always be writing dialogue that doesn't need the prose around it. You should always be able to get the characters' personality and how they're reacting to the particular situation just from their word choice, which is a great gold standard. There are some writers who do that very well. Dorothy Sayers, who wrote a series of mysteries back in the earlier part of the century, in the early part of the 1900s, does this very, very, very well. You can read. There's pages and pages where it's just open quotes, close quotes, dialogue between two characters, and you never lose track of who's saying what because the personalities are so very different.
So very clear.
Very, very clear. Most of the rest of us aren't that good. That's really the gold standard. But when you've only got dialogue to work with, you have to get that good. It forces you to think very hard about what the different characters are like.
Sure. I imagine the stage direction helps a little bit. So that, you want to get across, he said angrily, but we can tell the actor to do that.
Exactly, yeah.
And then, of course, you probably want to pick actors with different sounding voices to help it along a little bit and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's more on the production end, but yeah.
Sure. So one of the things that a friend of mine was talking about was he was adapting a Shakespearean play for a comic book form, which is very cool. But when he did that, he said he got to take out about half of the text of the play because in the play, most of the information appeared twice because the listener was hearing the play and needed to in real time understand it. For a radio play, do you give people redundant information or do you just rely on them paying really intense attention to it? That's
an interesting question. I think I would probably need to have to go back over the script to answer that for real. My recollection is that we did a little bit of repetition to make sure that anytime the player was making a choice, they knew the context they were making the choice in. Mm-hmm. So if there had been some dialogue they couldn't respond to, they might get like a summary from character number 3. It looks like John wants to do this, but Mary wants to do this. What do you think, Agent? What should we do?
Do you have a go back button so you can hear stuff again?
Not in the current implementation as far as I know.
But it sounds like you could almost play this game without touching anything, is the idea.
That's the idea, yeah. You can, it does come with a button that you can choose visually if you like, but the idea was that you should be able to play it in your car.
Got it.
So yeah, but of course we weren't dealing with Shakespeare either. So like it wasn't that level of complexity.
Well, and the poetry must come here.
Like in role-playing games where they have a lot of voiceovers and they have subtitles, I usually turn the subtitles on just in case. Like sometimes I miss a word or two, and I was like, I can't go back. It's a conversation tree,
Right.
Right. Yes.
I mean, that's kind of interesting too, because in a lot of the sit-down role-playing games that I've been in, a lot of times the game master is very patient with saying, wait, what did that person say? And if you missed it, well, we'll help you figure it out. But in this medium you're talking about, no, there's not a lot of help. If you missed it, you missed it, and part of the game is, in fact, comprehension the first time through. That's kind of neat. So all right, so that, you're talking about this a little bit already, but does this? All these things are placing pretty much a lot of constraints on your writing. You're talking about you have to get across ideas for dialogue alone, and I think it's kind of, there's a difference between, there's conversation that gets you an idea of who the characters are, or just sort of some filler, and there's conversation which has got vital information in it. And you might know before you write that conversation what that information is. Does that change how you approach that writing, knowing that you have to stick some important information in there? Or do you not think about it that way at all? And I'm just off.
Well, no, I'm thinking. I think about that. So, I think every scene has a particular point you're driving towards. If there are multiple choices in a scene, I'm thinking now choice of as well as Cygnus, then every choice has a particular piece of information that you're needing to get across so the player can make the choice. It's not quite a constraint in a bad way, though. It's more of, I don't know, it's a more positive word than that. I feel like I've actually had the good fortune to be remarkably unconstrained in the writing I've done for games because so much of it has been text-based and dialogue-driven. I think if you want to talk about constraints, writing for actual video games is the...
So, I mean, yeah, the little grid of I'm suspicious is very constraining. But, I mean, to some extent, the constraints are what tell you what you have to write about. I mean, I pretty much never wake up in the morning and say, I am going to write a thing. It's always, what are the things you have to write? I think I read somewhere that poets said that the very strict poem forms, it's the pushing against the boundaries that are what make them interesting, as opposed to prose, where you sort of like write whatever. But it's more that sometimes the constraints are kind of funny. Like for the cutscenes, the rule was you did them in screenplay format, and it's particular margins, particular fonts and capitalization and everything, and And the rule of thumb was 1 page per minute or 1 page per 30 seconds, or I don't remember what it was, but it was, and so it was, okay, well, we've got 2 minutes and 30 seconds budgeted for the cutscene, so it can't be more than 5 pages. And you can't do the trick of making the font smaller. So there was a lot of very strange text editing where, someone would say things and it was like a line plus a word. And you can't have that. That's taking up 10 seconds or something with the one word at the end, which it isn't really, but by the measurement, no, it has to be, you have to get, so, I would, sometimes you put in a semicolon instead of a dash because it's shorter. And then you would put in the descriptions of the scenes or the action or whatever, which is like, view of a study, zoom in on the desk, which has inkwell and whatever. And you had to make those also very short, but descriptive, because you can't just say study and leave it to the artist to imagine what you mean. And the reason that the rules are like that is because sort of like the more description you have in the set scene, in the scene description, sort of the more time it's going to take to show all of the things. If you have 15 different things on the desk and you want to be able to see them all, you want to focus on it for longer. So it's kind of true that the more lines you have describing the scene, the longer it takes. But it was a very strange constraint to write to just because it seemed so surreal. So
you're kind of gaming, you had a constraint and you kind of gamed the constraint to fill in one line. And that's not all surprising. I mean, that happens with all rule sets everywhere, right? People game the system.
And I'm sure screenwriters have to do that too. And they're probably, like, if there are screenwriters out there, they're probably like, oh yeah, use the short words.
And interestingly, there's an almost identical constraint in choice of games where we only want so many words on any given screen. People are playing these on a phone a lot of the time, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a rule of thumb that I can no longer remember about how many words you can have before you should have a choice. Mm-hmm. And how many words per screen. Perhaps you might have 2 screens before a choice. We probably shouldn't do a lot of that. You get the idea. But so that leads to some gaming, like with finding a shorter word to say a thing. But it also forces you to think about what you actually need to say right now, as opposed to later.
Sure.
Or never. Mm-hmm. Or, and what you said about if you need more words to paint the scene, it's going to take longer. That's definitely true when it's prose, right? If the player needs to know about, he's sitting at a desk where there's an inkwell and a book of poetry and something else that's going to be relevant later, you have to describe them all without knocking the player over the head necessarily. By the way, there's an inkwell. Yeah, exactly. Just slip it in.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about these constraints coming in. Are these constraints that were handed to you by the rest of the team? And if so, is there cases where how much creative control do you have to sort of fight back against that sometimes? Or is it pretty much written in stone? I mean, how do you interact with the team that way?
Well, when I was at Looking Glass, I was kind of the odd jobs person, as I said. So I had really no creative control, but I wasn't looking for it. I was happily doing tasks that I was given. Sometimes I guess I would say, sometimes you would get sort of feedback saying, so you need to make these things more this way. And I would be like, well, it isn't possible to make them, more suspicious sounding and still have them in the not suspicious category, or, but it would be a conversation. It was like, okay, the thing that you're telling me to do doesn't make sense. Please clarify, as opposed to, I think the thing you're telling me to do is wrong and I want it different.
Communications being
and often there would be a level designer who would say things like, okay, I need books for this, this, and this, or can you translate the books that I have these pieces of information. Can you translate them into Hammer speak for me? And so it was,
What's Hammer speak?
So the factions in Thief, there were the Hammerites who kind of spoke like King James Bibles, and there were the trickster minions, the Woodsies, who spoke weirdly. And that's kind of they, I think Terry Brosius came up with their dialect originally, and it was, the woodsies sing in the treesies, and it, it was it was just a little weird.
Crazy.
Yeah, and it tended to be not very grammatical, and there were a lot of diminutives on it, but it made them all sound like they were from the same subculture, and I think that that was useful. But where did I start with this? I don't know.
You started with working with the team, creative control.
Yeah.
If there's any, how you manage that, or was it frustrating, or any of that?
I can't do artist stuff, and I wasn't very good at the levels. So I don't want the creative control. I want to do the stuff I'm good at, and let the other people who are good at stuff do their stuff. That's.
I think that's certainly the attitude I would take if I were working on a video game, which I haven't done yet. Maybe someday, because I have great respect for people who can do visual storytelling. I have no artistic ability myself, so I would definitely be pushing that off.
Right.
The choice of games, I'm doing a solo project for the first time, galloping towards the end of a solo project. The other ones I have done have been co-authored, and so there was the first one, certainly I was kind of a junior partner learning and so the Choice of Broadsides was the first game I worked on, and when I joined the team it was all storyboarded, and so it was a matter of, right, well, I'm gonna learn how to do this, so I'll take that scene to start with, The second game, Choice of Romance, Adam Strong-Morse and I were definitely colleagues, and so there's a give and take in any kind of partnership, any kind of creative partnership for sure, where you have two people with different opinions on how to do, X and Y and Z, and so we have a pretty solid working relationship. The one I'm doing solo has been both freeing and terrifying in that I have creative control. Yay! It's wonderful. It's totally my story, and it's phenomenal. And it does mean, however, that when I don't know how to do something, there are times when I do kind of wish I had a co-author to say, I actually don't have any good ideas for this. Can you? What I do have is a very, very good editor. And so we work in pretty close partnership where I can, for instance, last week, write her an email after a playtesting session saying, I think we might have to eliminate this section completely. If we do, it will cause these other problems. But if we don't, I don't know how to solve these problems. Which do you think? Leading to a 2-hour conference call where we came up with a third option, which I would never have come up with by myself, which meant we didn't have to cut the scene and we solved the problems a different way. So
that's really
hooray
cool.
for editors.
So I really like the fact you mentioned that, is you're playtesting your work and it's not done.
Yes.
You're playtesting your writing, which I think is awesome. And so that's a great example of a time where playtesting totally just told you that something wasn't working. Does it happen a lot?
Unfortunately, fortunately, right? Because you'd much rather have it when it's still under your control than when it's out in the wild, right? So the Codename Cygnus thing, I was the lead writer, so I had a lot of influence, control in the script, right? It was me and the creative director John Myers, working together on it. But John was in charge of production, so I actually wasn't involved in the playtesting for that. I would get notes that were along the lines of, this dialogue sequence is running way long, we need to cut it. You get the idea. Mm-hmm. The choice of game stuff, I have been much more in the trenches with this game I'm working on now, my solo project. I'm buying dinner for friends and sitting behind them and watching them play it. Because it's the only way I can tell when they're confused. Like people, you can ask people to write you notes, and they will, and they mean well, but they never remember everything. And so when you're sitting there and somebody's taking 10 minutes to make a choice, you can ask, so what are you thinking right now? And you can get an idea of whether they have no idea what's going on, which was actually the problem in this most recent, that the player was utterly confused, and that wasn't the first time I'd gotten that feedback, although it was the first time it was utter confusion rather than mild confusion. Or whether the player is so engrossed that they want to make sure they do exactly the right thing, which is a fine response, and they can take 10 minutes if that's what they need to do. So yes, I've sort of wandered away from, what was the original question? Was that the
playtest? You found it useful, you do it all the time. In fact, you're going out of your way to do it. And at the solo project, which is mostly writing, and you're still playtesting a lot, which I think is really fascinating. You mentioned an editor, I have to imagine. So you've written books as well.
Yes.
Do you playtest books?
Yeah, I do, actually. You don't call it that in traditional fiction, but absolutely. You have drafts, and I belong to the Cambridge Science Fiction Workshop.
My husband gets really grumpy when I call him a playtester instead of QA.
Oh, yeah. Who's this? What's that again?
So Jerry works in QA, and I often refer to him as a playtester, and he's like, it's not actually playtesting.
Is he QA not for games?
Not for games, yeah.
Okay, all right. That's hilarious. That's me.
So, Laura, have you had any experiences with playtesting being essential, or showing you the stuff you didn't expect?
Yeah, I mean, in general for computer games, you have to have playtesting, and I feel like there's actually a new modern version where you don't playtest and you ship broken games and you just patch as you go, but I don't approve of that.
That is the new modern version, yeah.
Looking Glass had in-house playtesting, so you not only had sort of like the naive people saying, "Oh, this is confusing." You had people who were like, "Okay, I know how to do this and this and this," and they would try to do all of the things and tell you which ones were broken, and that's a little bit more for the programming side and the level design side. But I guess there was one thing that came up pretty early was the head designer thought that it would be really cool if there was sort of a thieves' cant, and so all of the internal stuff that the Garrett character would be saying to himself, and sometimes the guards might be saying, they would use dialects. They would say things like eagled instead of saw, or I forget what we came up with for heard. And he had this idea of it being very Clockwork Orange, where it has its own internal language that you can mostly figure out if you're paying attention. And so my first set of dialogue stuff was full of this stuff, and the playtesters were like, we have no idea what they're saying. This makes no sense. They're saying random words and it tells us nothing. So that all got cut out, and pretty much the only thing that got kept was the word taffer, which was sort of the generic swear word. You would say, "You taffer, I saw you back there," because we were trying for a no swearing game. But sometimes you want to have characters sound like they're swearing, so we had that word. It stayed.
That's awesome. I find there's a difference between testing and playtesting, though, too. So one is technical. Does the game work? Are there crashing bugs? And we have, I certainly at Choice of, it's two different things. There's the, can you play to the end of it without it crashing on you? Good. All right, for first level, that's great. Can you play to it with it doing the variable hands-off between the scenes correctly? Or do you suddenly find that you're married to this person instead of that person? It's probably like this happen all the time. And that's actually, although my undergrad degree is in English, I did work in consumer electronics, so that such that I was working with programmers. I was in QA, in fact, a long time ago, before I was in marketing. And so thinking about it in terms of the black box testing of, are the variables being passed? Are the flags being set? Are there typos in the English on the screen? Everything capitalized? And then there's the play testing, which is, are you delivering the experience you're trying to deliver, which you can only tell by watching a human being play it.
Got it. I like that you split those two apart, because when we talk about it in class, we often don't make that distinction, but I think it's an important distinction, that there's the, does it do what we think it does technically, and does it do what we want it to do emotionally or enjoyably or whatever. That's a good distinction.
In consumer electronics, I worked for Bose Corporation. They separated it into verification and validation were the subparts of the test department. It was, did we build the thing right? And did we build the right thing?
Awesome.
Which I thought was pretty clever.
I like that, yeah.
I feel like from my experience, that it would be kind of more programmer bugs versus design bugs. Do the variables do the right thing? Programmer bugs. Does it crash? Programmer bugs. Is it fun? Design bugs.
Yeah, that's a great way to think of it, yeah.
Sure. So I've just got one more question for you, then we'll turn it over if anyone out there has questions. But before I do that, I want to point out that while I did sort of warn you that I'd be asking a little bit about, have playtesting been useful for you, I did not ask them to go on as long and as enthusiastically as they did about how awesome playtesting has been.
Is this something you're trying to...
We say this a lot.
Okay.
Playtest, 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 playtest. No matter how much you're playtesting, you probably aren't doing it enough. Anyway, so the last question I have kind of comes back to something you were talking about, how when you did your first project, you had the storyboards, and you're like, ooh, I'll take on this part, and another writer might take on a different part. Mm-hmm. Did you have any problems getting the voices to match? Presumably you've got different authors, different writers for different sections, but you want to feel like it's a coherent piece. You obviously want to write in a similar style to the other writers.
Did we have a problem? The answer is yes, but not like in a funny, horrible way. This is one of the challenges with Broadsides was 3 people. It was me and Dan Fabulich and Adam Strong-Morse, and so it was sort of part of the cost of doing business, of dividing the work among 3 people, was the hey, this guy has a different has speech patterns that imply a different educational level when person A is writing than when person B is writing. Either is fine for a sailor in the Napoleonic era, but we should pick one. Like these were bugs in the spreadsheet when we were like, okay, we got to fix that because so and so sounds like he has a split personality. And there were sometimes issues between. Like that's a design thing, like as you were saying, that's a flavor thing, right? There were sometimes issues with handoffs on the technical sense, but that's also like that was in the somebody wasn't setting a flag that someone else needed type of thing, and that was in the spreadsheet. I think that's just a collaborative thing, like sure. What it means, interestingly, is that having 3 writers doesn't save you as much time as you might think. It is probably quicker than having 1, but not 3 times quicker because you have the integration phase that you don't otherwise have.
Sure. I like that you put that because I suspect you're all encountering the same thing with your code right now.
Yeah, I found that having, for any given sort of tone thing, having one person who was the expert, or at least that was their thing. Like Terry would tend to do the pass on all the woodsies and make sure they seemed woodsy enough, and I would do the pass on the hammers and make sure that people hadn't confused thee and thou and translate things into King James. I mean, it wasn't even real King James. It was sort of like what people think King James sounds like.
For Broadsides, we actually had Adam was serving as lead writer. This is a Secondary World Horatio Hornblower. So not the real Napoleonic War, but the Napoleonic War. Like, but so it was his idea, and he was the Hornblower fan, right? So if there was a disagreement about the right way to name something or present something or whatever, Adam had final say because I read 3 of the books really fast as I was getting up to speed for the project, and so did Dan, but that's not the same thing as being immersed in it, right? Right. It was actually harder when Adam and I were working as complete partners, and we were building our own secondary world medieval fantasy from the ground up, because there was no, sometimes it's nice to have a final arbiter, and as opposed to having to come to a resolution, not necessarily fight it out, but come to an agreement with everything under discussion.
Mm-hmm. It's just faster if you can win that. If we start to get an impasse, if someone can say, nope, we're going to go with A.
Okay,
yeah.
Go with A. Yeah.
All right. Any questions from out there while we're here at the moment? Please.
So something I think is true about the choice of games is that, like, if you make choices at the beginning of the story that, like, carry over and possibly have grand repercussions at, like, the 3-hour mark or something like that, how would you actually playtest that? Like, it seemed like playtest having to deal with something that happened 3 hours ago without having the playtest go on for 3 hours.
Right. So let me paraphrase that just for the microphones.
Yes.
You're asking about, you have a playtest that would take a long, long time to see the results, but your playtester isn't that patient. So how do you work with that?
Yeah, well, I actually don't know how you work with it in that constraint, because you can, if you are the author and you know the game, you can self-playtest it such that you skip ahead to see how scene 5 feels when you're married to Grace instead of to Diana, right? But if you're playtesting for real, the Choice by Gaslight, the game that I hope will ship early in the winter, has about 4 hours of gameplay. And the only way I have found to test what it feels like for the players to make the choices and be in it is to sit behind them for 4 hours, which is why I buy them dinner, because it's the very least I can do. And this is all informal. These are all friends of mine.
Of course.
So I think there are things that you can't shortcut. You just got to do it if you want to know what it's like for the player. On the other hand, there may be a better solution to that I just haven't found yet. I don't know.
I mean, so for a larger company, the answer is you pay them a wage to do it for 3 hours. I mean, it's their job,
Sure.
They do become faster at it. Like, if they were playtesting Choice of Games, they would probably be able to read pretty quickly the things that they have read before. But
absolutely, when I say 4 hours of gameplay, that's the first time. The first 3 or 4 scenes are not substantively different, no matter what you pick. I mean, there's some flavor text differences, but they're not meaningfully so. So once you realize that, then the second playthrough is just, right. Okay, here's where it starts getting interesting. Now I'm going to slow down and read again.
Sure. And I think that's, in large part, actually, why we encourage shorter games in the class, actually. Partially because of scope for your own development, but also partially because of that playtest problem.
Speaking as the author of some of the more longer and more convoluted Choice of Games, speaking also because the company encourages people to download the code and make their own. They have a hosted games program. You shouldn't start with long, convoluted anything. You should start with, seriously start with something short and simple, and prove that you've got the language and you've got, and then branch out into things that will take you forever and lots of dinners to properly test.
Well, what might be a good sort of first project there, like a conversation, or a one-page short story that ends up being, obviously branching a lot more writing than that.
So a typical Choice of Game is divided into 10-ish chapters, which at least within the senior staff we refer to as vignettes. I don't know if that terminology got to the website or not, but we call them vignettes. So writing a vignette, which has, I forget how many words they're supposed to have, and let's say 4 or 5 choices, is a good way to get a handle on how it all works, on the rhythm, on the technicalities. And I would go back to what I said earlier, which is when I joined the company, I picked a vignette from the 10 that the partners had already laid out, and they asked me which one I wanted. Mm-hmm. And I picked the courtship scene, in no small part because there was a similar one in the game that had shipped. And I had something I could work from. So what are we working towards? It should be about this long. It should have about this many choices. It should have about this pacing. Okay, all right, so I can copy that. Got it. All right, now I'll do something totally different. Now I can do a whole game. Now, you get the... So
you started it's actually really interesting because a lot of people doing computer game development start as modders. You're going to modify an existing game or existing level, and you almost start with, you mod the existing writing, but of course replace all the words.
Hey, a lot of traditional fiction writers start writing fanfic. I mean, it's a thing, sure. Right? It means that you have I'm sort of off in the weeds now, right? But fanfic in particular means that the world building is done, the character voices are set. What you need to
aim for a voice as opposed to make one up.
Exactly, and similarly, the constraints of the world are known rather than things you have to impose, right? So what you have to figure out is a plot that works with this world and these characters, and that's just a plot. Yeah. And then once you got that down, you can grow into sort of the other things.
That's a good little way to do it, I think.
So something that Laura mentioned earlier was the whole standing around and listening to NPCs talk for minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that in the shock games in particular, they answered that with the audio logs
Yes.
that now are a lot more pervasive than just the shock series. And I'm wondering, has that started to become too much of a crutch to sort of get around this whole we want to do all this exposition, but we don't want to tie people down to a location? Or do you find that that's that there is a very specific use for that kind of?
I think that the shock in particular, it's trying to be sort of a role-playing game, which at its hallmark has dialogue trees and stuff, except there's no people there. And so it's replacing dialogue trees with little monologue trees. So it's both exposition and also atmosphere setting. So I think that actually, I thought that worked very well. Shock 2 had a lot of sort of cutscene, in-engine cutscenes where you would go up, you would be going down a corridor and there would be a window and then there would be something that happens on the other side of the window. And that felt a little bit more like the thief listening to people talk, is because it would be the scripted thing to happen that you would have to watch or not watch, and it would take place whether or not you were paying attention to it. And then it always had to be built so that you couldn't interact with it because you didn't want it to be the case that you saved the person who was being killed or whatever. But yeah, the audio logs felt like I thought were a nicely atmospheric way to do text dumps.
The question is it overused now?
Oh.
And I don't know. I imagine just like any trick you use in a game, if everyone does it, yeah, it'll be overused. But in some games it's the right tool. In some games it's not.
I guess just following up on that, it seems to be that serve a very similar function to, say, written books that you find around in a game like Skyrim or something. Mm-hmm. And it serves that world building and atmosphere building bit. But because you hear it as opposed to read it, it's something that you can do while doing other things. You can go ahead and do the garbage cans while you're receiving all this information. And I'm wondering if that diminishes its value because you don't really have to pay attention to it. And you can just kind of like be the packer and collect all the audio logs without really caring about any of them. Or is it more prevalent because there's no reason to avoid them? It doesn't stop you from getting on.
Yeah, I think that I would listen to all the audio logs, but there are some games that have had too many books. I could not possibly read all the books, and so I didn't. So I think it's almost more setting the right number for any particular player's enjoyment, and how I have no idea how to pick what the right number is. I mean, probably somebody read all the books in Morrowind. I did not. But
player specific
yeah.
too, I imagine. Some players will read none of them, some players
Yeah.
will read all of them.
But the question of I don't know if you even want to try to say, well, we don't want to let the player not care about the things. I mean, if the players don't want to care, that's their choice, I guess. That's a totally different thing. What if people are playing your game wrong? Yeah.
Out there, right?
Yeah, so there's the question of, should you be able to use the mods to let you just kill anything? Is that playing it wrong? Or does everyone get to pick how they want to play it? Is using cheat codes evil, or letting anyone? Yeah.
Is there an analog of concept art in writing? Like for example, you have a paragraph that explains what a character is that's not in the game.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
How often are you responsible for that as well?
So I guess those would be design documents, and those are traditionally not as well kept up as they should be. So they often describe the state of the game as it was 3 months ago. Those tend to be written more by the higher level people than I ever was. So they would be, there would be the overall design document. Here's what we want the game to be like. Here's what we want this level to be like. But that is a good way of being sort of a reference of a tone reference or a gameplay. Here are the things we are aiming for, and you can always go back and look at that.
Specifically character, you said concept art. So were you thinking characters, or were you thinking game overall? Or?
They talked about concept art being partly to explain to the artists what they're going to do,
Sure.
and partly just to inspire the team, which I thought was an interesting
Right.
idea.
Okay. I see that. So the games I've worked on, all the games I've worked on actually, except for the RPG where I was in the world building part of it, have had character Bibles, separate from other design documents. So there's the design documents that say, Choice of Broadsides will have 10 vignettes, and this is the one where you capture a prize ship, and here are the 5 main choices, and here's the one where you have the evil lieutenant over you, and here are the 5 main choices. And so there was that, and those do fall out of date very quickly, because once you're in the code, you realize you want to do different things. You're in the writing.
Nobody likes documentation.
and absolutely. But the
IT now. Still true.
The character Bibles, though, I have found to be more inspiring, right? And so you sit down and you say that you can do it in a few lines, right? The backstory of this character is this, and the things they care about are this, and I recently learned a technique. Richard Dansky from Ubisoft is a friend of a friend, and boy, is he a very, very, very skilled game writer. And technique he referred to was, what was it? It was interview questions, right? But the point is you answer them in the voice of the character, not just what the character would answer. Their favorite, their best friend is Susan, but there's a difference between a character who says, Bob, he's always got my back. And I first met Susan when we were in kindergarten, and we were friends all through elementary school, except for that time when we had a fight in 6th grade over and you know something about both of the speakers just from the way they answer.
Most design documents are not necessarily inspiring, but something that is possibly more so is the 1 minute of gameplay. And it's sort of like the little narration of what you're doing as some random moment in the game and why is it fun. Because why is it fun is kind of the thing that you need to keep focusing everyone on. The point of the game is not to show you the cool art or to make you listen to my really cool dialogue. It's to be fun. And I think that if you can write a 1 minute of gameplay, which is somewhat inspiring for your designers and programmers, then that's really good.
Then I think I will follow up with one last thing, and we may have already used up an answer here, but we'll try it. What can you think of that you didn't know when you started trying to write for games that kind of surprised you, and now you would think to yourself, yeah, I didn't know that. I did not expect that to be that way.
I think the screenplay thing was the weirdest. Just a screenplay has these fonts and these margins, and you can't go over I gather that you can submit academic abstracts and it has the same sort of thing. No more than 800 characters or whatever. But I think that was the strangest. That was a very big surprise. Most writing, I think, feels more natural.
Sure. Screenplays are pretty specific. Yeah. My personally speaking, my biggest surprises have all been the positive ones. I thought I wanted to write novels, and I still think I probably want to write novels, but I didn't expect this to be as artistically satisfying as it has turned out to be. Now, granted, I'm in a pretty narrow writing field. What I do is not typical of what Laura's done is more typical of writing for the games industry. Something that I think surprises a lot of people who have a background in traditional fiction and then transition into writing games, because I've seen this a lot, is the, back in the LARP days, we used to call it the oops, I forgot to add the interactive part, where you have people who are very, very, very skilled at plots and at character arcs and at story arcs, and are not accustomed to having to leave room for the player to interact with the world. And this is, I think, a problem you get specifically when you have somebody transitioning from non-interactive fiction to interactive fiction. I think I was fortunate that I made those mistakes very early when I was running LARPs when I was in college, and learned those lessons fast.
Right.
It's sort of at least at that time doing Quest at Wesleyan was one of the typical first-time jam mistakes was putting too much on their staff members, their non-player characters, and not giving enough room for the players to play the game and affect the world and impact what happens. You can't impact what happens because we have the scene for the end. No, it's not a play.
Right.
Yeah.
I have another answer.
Okay, excellent.
It is awesome how cool your writing sounds when it is spoken by an actual professional voice actor. And I did not expect that.
As opposed to programmers?
Or by me, like when I say it in my head, and then there was a little ritual at the end of Thief where the dark god is doing this ritual, and I was like, well, he's doing this thing. He has to say something. You always have to have a poem for a ritual. So I wrote him a poem to be saying. And then the actor for Constantine came in and spoke it in his dark god voice. And it was awesome. And then even better was when it was translated into French and spoken by the French dark god, and it still rhymed. And I was like, they translated my doggerel into doggerel in French. Oh my God. And that was neat.
All right. Well, thank you both very much for coming and sharing your experiences with us.
You're very welcome. Thank you for
Welcome.
having me.
All right. I'll stand near for the microphone.
Yeah, thank you. So it's 2:08. We're going to give you a few more minutes to take a break. They're going to be here. How much time do you all have? Do you have any time after?
Sure.
Yeah. So if you'd like to get them to play test your game, just come on down, grab them, bring them to your game. If you'd like to ask them any questions personally, please do just come on down. The rest of the time is for you.